Hello, I'm Benjamin McAvoy, and today I'd like to talk to you about the upcoming series of lectures about Jane Austen's Persuasion. Persuasion, written in 1816 and published in December 1817, in part shared with Northanger Abbey in the same volume, published posthumously after Jane Austen's death. It is Austen's late and mature masterpiece. Many overlook it, which is a shame. Many Janeites, of which unfortunately I cannot confess to being one, though I have tried endlessly to deep dive into Jane Austen and take her on as one of my favourite authors. We'll get into that in a second. Many Janeites have to graduate to Persuasion. They love the vitality and the bubbling, sparkling energy of Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. They love Emma Woodhouse in Emma, Sense and Sensibility. Persuasion is a difficult novel to get into because Anne Elliot is the most subdued of all of Austen's protagonists, but she's also the most complex. And she is the heroine, of which Jane Austen said she is almost too good for me. Many consider Persuasion to have an autumnal tone. There is a real preoccupation with death, decay, dying, and coming to the end of one's days, which obviously, no doubt, it's shadowing, it's mirroring events that were happening in Jane's life. She was very ill when she was writing. Though she was ill, she held back the manuscript because she wanted to put up the money to publish herself because she could get a greater return. So she obviously thought that she would continue to live. So it's tinged with sadness, poignancy, tragedy, melancholy. It's got that real aging sense. And Persuasion as a novel, of course, it's about love, and it's about mature love. In Plato's Symposium, he talked about the two different types of love. You've got the heavenly, and then you've got the earthly, lust-bound love. Now, of course, the two protagonists, Anne Elliot and Frederick Wentworth, their love endures over time. There's a constancy there. So it's a mature love, and they understand each other in a way where, if you've read Anna Karenina, they have a very similar thing going on to Kitty and Levin. It's that sort of book, but it's about aging gracefully, and it's about persuasion, as the title would lead you to expect, whether you can be persuaded to do something against your wishes, persuaded negatively, positively. It's about the powers of persuasion, it's about aging gracefully, and it's about mature love, among many other things. Obviously, Jane Austen, as a writer, she is always preoccupied with civility, the aristocracy, the gentry. She's preoccupied with marriage, the different levels of society. And she was writing at a time, and this is really interesting because you either gravitate naturally and effortlessly towards Jane Austen. You either fall in love with her and her world and her sensibility. She's a great ironist, great satirist. She writes with great verve and vitality, and Persuasion is one of the most vitalistic, if not the most vitalistic, of her novels, because you have to read it several times and carefully in order to pick up on it. It's the sort of novel that takes a bit of effort to fall in love with, but it could very well be, if you persevere with it, your favourite of all the Austens. Now, Austen's worth reading for many reasons. One of the foremost reasons is she's a master at a blend of psychologically complex characters and compelling story. Before her, novels couldn't really have both. They would have one or the other. They'd have psychologically complex characters like Richardson, and they would have a good story like in Fielding, Tom Jones. She blended the two. Not only that, she gave way more credibility to the women's movement in literature. Yes, she was largely unpublished, but she was also publishing under a pseudonym, a male name, during her lifetime. But she did give credibility and later credence, and she kicked it all off. She revealed that women are actually more adept at detailing and exploring the everyday intricacies of life than the male counterparts. Suddenly, women's fiction was a thing. Now, of course, there were female authors beforehand, and we're going to look at those in the book club. We're going to look at Mary Wollstonecraft's On the Vindication of Women. It's a feminist text, and I think primarily, that's why I initially had resistance when I was younger. My first introduction to Austen, I was obviously adolescent, I was a teenager, I was in sixth form, I believe I was probably 16, and we had to do it as part of our A-level studies. We had to read Pride and Prejudice. So I've read Pride and Prejudice perhaps 20 times, and I didn't like the club because I felt like it was very female-centric. I felt like, as a man, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I was either the only man in that class or there was another boy who never turned up. But it was completely female-dominated. Now, of course, there are areas where the tables turn and there would be a lone woman amongst a load of men, But it really gave me a sense that in that group, my voice wasn't particularly heard or respected. Now they would, these women, these young girls and the female teacher, they would salivate over Mr. Darcy, either the idea of him and the words on the page or the Colin Firth representation, but they would salivate over Colin, they would salivate over Mr. Darcy. And I felt like any time I tried to stipulate like a literary critique or come up with an idea, that it was either completely overshadowed or just full on several times by the teacher. I was told, you don't have a relevant voice on this because this is a female topic. This is a woman's world. It's a female writer dealing with the trials and tribulations and the interior monologue, and Austen does that masterfully. She really pioneered free indirect discourse. When you look at Tolstoy, when you look at Flaubert, and you marvel at what they were doing, they learned from Austen. Now, if you want to read the Russian novelists, you have to go back to the French novelists, and if you want to read the French novelists, you have to go back to the English novelists. And who is the archetypical English novelist? Well, you've got Dickens, you've got Trollope, but go back even further and you've got Austen. Now, I felt like they didn't respect, and it might have had something to do with age, but that left a really sour taste in my mouth. It was already a topic matter that I couldn't fully appreciate. I've never really liked what I now call teacup dramas, Downton Abbey, that sort of thing. Not disparaging anyone who does. And the thing is, I can objectively, in a detached way, appreciate Austen, and I hope that many people, for example, my favourite writer being Shakespeare, I can understand how people are not exactly going to get swept away by him, or they might find him boring, or might think he doesn't talk to them. Now, I'm trying to redress that because Shakespeare's poorly taught, just like Austen. Austen, funnily enough, is eminently Shakespearean. If you're reading Austen, you're reading the Shakespearean tradition, masterfully deployed, almost unlike anybody else. There is a conviction and vitality in Austen that almost no other author shares. Now, I can appreciate Austen, and I have tried, perhaps more than every other author, to appreciate her for two reasons. First and foremost, there was a long period in my life where I didn't want to read people who I could feel were not good people. Now, it's difficult because obviously Anna Karenina is a tremendous novel. I get so much out of it. But the author, Tolstoy, is a little bit troublesome. The same with Victor Hugo. Les Miserables is a masterpiece. Marcel Proust, I actually like him from what I know about him, but of course he had a bit of a troubled life. Now, unfortunately, when we read these beautiful, beautiful works of literature and we think they're perfect, we can be a bit crestfallen and a little bit upset by the fact that the person who created them is not themselves perfect. There are a handful who are perfect. Chekhov, Shakespeare, and Austen herself. Austen, a Pisces, like myself. Shakespeare, who people will say he's not a Pisces, but I believe he probably was a Pisces. He was born just on the cusp. She was an eminently good person. She was very, very nice. She had good, and if you take her and Elliot to be almost a stand-in for her, you'll see that. And I thought it was a real shame that I couldn't get that much out of Austen. So I tried and I tried and I tried, and now I can appreciate her. And I think that puts me in good stead, not only to guide the Janeites of, like I said, I'm not a Janeite. I appreciate her. I think she's a master. I think she's one of the greatest writers in the English tradition. She's not my go-to. I wouldn't take her to a desert island. I would take Shakespeare. But I can appreciate her on a very, very deep level, a very visceral level at this point. But I think that also puts me in good stead to help people who, like me, and for similar reasons, were perhaps resistant to Jane Austen. And it's interesting in the book club, because everybody seems to have fallen in love with Anna Karenina. So it's very interesting when we go over to Crime and Punishment, because it's a very different novel. And the choice and the progression is very much by design. So it's very interesting to see who prefers Dostoevsky and for what reasons, and to juxtapose it with Anna Karenina. Now, we're going to go into the Proust Project very, very soon, which is going to be very, very long, and it's going to be very meditative and deep and reflective, and we're going to expand outwards. We're going to learn a lot about art and music and all that good stuff, and we're going to journal together, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So the best book right before Proust, we need to get someone from the English tradition. We got the Russians. We're going to go into France and French literature. Let's read not only a novel from one of the greatest English writers. But let's read one of her greatest, if not her greatest novel, Persuasion. Without Jane Austen, there probably isn't a Tolstoy. There probably isn't a Dickens. There probably isn't a Proust even. Follow it back far enough. Unpick the influences, untangle them, and you'll come to that conclusion as well. So it's a very slim novel, but it's going to be really fun. And what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the rise of the novel, and we're going to talk about women writing and in literature. We're going to do a case study of Anne Elliot as a heroine, and we're going to put ourselves in the shoes of the first reader. Now, okay, so this was published in 1817. Leading up to that date, publication and publishing history was interesting. From about 1700 to 1740, there were around 7 books published annually. 7 books per year. From 1740 to 1770, that went up to 20 books per year. And from 1770 to 1800, there were about 40 books per year. And that would make you think that perhaps they were really good quality because there's not many of them. No, they were largely awful. There were novels, but not how we see them today. Like I said, Jane Austen is responsible for the novel. So when we're reading a novel today, we are reading her. And if we are resistant to her or don't find her inspiring or find her a bit boring, then it's because we've become so accustomed and comfortable and we take for granted the novel form that she pioneered. So we're going to put ourselves in the position of the first reader, and we're going to look at what sort of came before. So there's Gothic texts, novels were discredited, there's ballads, there's all sorts of folk tales and stuff like that. So Walter Scott was another sort of pioneer for the novel form, and he rose alongside Austen. But the novel looked a bit different. When we're talking about Richardson and Defoe and Fielding, it looked a bit different from Jane Austen. But she sort of learned something from all of those writers, and she put together something that we now are going to get a lot out of. It's a very slim book. It shouldn't take very long to get through. I'm going to guide you through it. I would highly recommend, if you want the hardback version, go for the beautiful Everyman's Library. I like to take the dust jackets off, and it's a nice lush, deep verdant green for Austen. What else? You can also go for the paperback version here. If you want to do marginalia. There's a really nice collection by Juniper Books, which looks beautiful. It's handmade. I'm waiting for that to turn up. And in addition to the reading and the guided commentary and the discussion, we're also going to be hunting, foraging for different things. I'm going to give you some assignments, things to look out for. So I want you to cut out and keep certain passages. You're going to find a line that you can keep forever that resonates with you. You're going to find some illuminating passages. You're going to unpick them. We're going to do it together. We're going to bring them together and we're going to workshop them and appreciate them like wine tasting. And for those who are struggling to get into Austen, I completely sympathise with you. So you will also be asked to search for passages, deliberately finding passages where you perhaps drift away, perhaps you don't appreciate them or you find them uninspiring. We're going to bring them in too, and we're going to learn to appreciate them. So it's going to be a fun little series, and it's going to lead us in to the Proust Project. If that sounds good to you, you know where to find me, you know where to find the lectures. By now, it's at patreon.com/hardcore literature, and you'll get immediate access, if you choose the Proust tier, to the entire back catalogue. At time of recording, we have, I think, 60 long-form videos. We've got audios, all sorts of bits and bobs on Freud, Dostoevsky, Twain, Nietzsche, Tolstoy, obviously. So it's a good club. Everyone in there is super nice. So I look forward to seeing you in there. Let's read Jane Austen's Persuasion.